Many conservatives have renewed their campaign against the Internal Revenue Service this past week at the Conservative Political Action Conference. This is during an investigation over political targeting, alleged political targeting by the tax agency. Senator Ted Cruz and others once again have called for Congress to completely abolish the IRS and adopt a new, simple, flat tax. It's a move our next guest, Stacy Swimp, Project 21 spokesperson and a frequent guest here on Arise Exchange, agrees with. He joins us on the phone from Flint, Michigan. Stacy, welcome back to Arise Exchange.
Hey, thank you. Good to be back again.
Let me ask you first about this political story about the Tea Party and big businesses and just get your thoughts. Is the Tea Party anti-business? Because there seems to be a belief by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, a very Republican and conservative organization, that the Tea Party is now standing in the way of helping businesses.
Well, first of all, I'll quickly say that the Chamber of Commerce is not necessarily a conservative and Republican advocate organization. You have to remember that the Chamber of Commerce has supported immigration reform that's essentially anti-business. They, on a national level, have supported a number of things that I would submit to you is not healthy for our economy. But to your second point, the Tea Party, you know, I'm not a Tea Party advocate, but I will say that I relate to and agree with the Tea Party principles of limited government. I don't think it's anti-business to say that we want to lower the burdens on businesses by reforming the U.S. corporate tax code. I don't think it's anti-business to say that we want to strengthen our free market. I don't think it's anti-business to say that we want to lower minimum wage so that we can get more of the people in our country back to work. And finally, I don't think it's anti-business to say that we want to deregulate in labor and also in energy so that we can get more Americans back to work and also make it easier for struggling Americans, especially older Americans who are struggling they're on a fixed income.
Okay, but Stacey, there is certainly a sense that if you there's a sense if you shut down the federal government, that's anti-business, because I can tell you businesses lost a lot of money, and that there's a sense that if you don't pursue immigration reform, that's anti-business because we need the immigrants.
The responsibility of shutting down the government wasn't the fault of the Tea Party. You have Republicans and Democrats in Congress who could not and would not work together, and in most cases would blame the other. So I don't know how anyone got to a point where they blamed that on the Tea Party. It wasn't the Tea Party who did that. It was the people in Washington, D.C. who did that.
Okay, let's talk about the IRS. There is this growing call, let's say on the right, certainly, to abolish the IRS. You know, what do you want to replace it with? Because the government needs money to function.
I think that the new flat tax is an idea that we need to absolutely discuss. And I agree with you, we have to raise revenue. Now, understand, the new flat tax essentially replaces all income, payroll, and death taxes along with a slew of excise taxes. It will improve our economy, and most important, it will simplify the tax code and get rid of this egregious bureaucracy where suddenly now the IRS is turning on the American people, and in many cases infringing upon the First Amendment right of people who have nonprofit organizations, such as what we've seen with the
certainly there's been there's certainly been controversy about that. But let me ask you something: if you employ the flat tax, you're going to have to get rid of the mortgage deduction tax, for example. You're going to have to get rid of other tax deductions that have helped people into the middle class, don't you? Otherwise, you cannot generate enough revenue.
I disagree with that. I think the whole narrative of the middle class is a socialist concept that I think if we really study that carefully, understand the flat tax, what that does is it gives everyone skin in the game. It retains the earned income credit to preserve the level of income support for low-wage workers. And if you have to talk about middle-class families, well, guess what? What the flat tax does for middle-class and low-class families, they receive a tax credit of around $3,000 toward the purchase of health insurance, since we want to talk about Obamacare in our system. And also, finally, you get deductions for higher education, gifts and charitable contributions, and an optional home mortgage interest deduction to your question.
Stacey, let me just ask you one last question then. What is a realistic goal here? Rein in the IRS and adopt a reform to the tax, or scrap it all together in a flat tax? What do you think you can get to in the next few years?
I think a realistic goal is to reform the tax code as we know it, to scrap the IRS as we know it. We need to implement a flat tax. I think that's the realistic goal. I'm not a fair tax guy. I don't think necessarily that that's realistic. I'm not saying it's a bad idea. You asked me about what's realistic. I don't think the fair tax is realistic. I think that if we can educate the American people on the role of government and how we can benefit from having a flat tax system, I think we can get that done.
Okay, Stacy Swimp, Project 21 spokesperson, thanks again for your advice and analysis today.
Thank you.